Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about Azure Backup solution. Azure Backup is one of the component of Azure Recovery Services Vault. So throughout this video, I'm going to say Recovery Service Vault is nothing but RSV in short. So Recovery Service Vault has two subcomponents. One of them is Azure Backup, and the other one is Azure Site Recovery. Okay, and Azure Backup is used to protect on-premises and Azure workloads. When it comes to the on-premises workloads, you can back up your Hyper-V or VMware or bare metal. And if you have a domain controller, you can back up system state of your domain controller. And if you don't want to back up the entire server, you wanted to back up a specific files and folders, you can use Azure Backup Service to back up the files and folders. When it comes to the Azure, so Azure Backup can protect Azure virtual machines and SQL database running on Azure VM. And if you have a file share created in storage account, you can back up the file share as well. And if you have a SAP HANA running on Azure VM, you can back up those workloads as well. If you wanted to back up the on-premises workloads, especially for Hyper-V, VMware, bare metal, you need to install a component called MABS, which is nothing but Microsoft Azure Backup Server or a service. You need to install this application in one of the server, and then you need to configure the backup. When it comes to the system state and files and folders, you just need to install Mars agent, which is nothing but Microsoft Azure Recovery Services agent. So when it comes to the Azure, so you don't need to install any specific application as such manually. So since it is Azure native service, there will be few extensions that gets installed inside the your Azure workloads to configure the backup. So in this video, I'm going to focus more on Azure VM Backup, how to configure Azure VM Backup, and what happens when you configure a backup for your virtual machine. So let me take a scenario where you have a virtual machine running on Azure. Let me just put that here. So let us assume this is your virtual machine running on Azure. I'm going to call this as web virtual machine or web VM. And assuming this VM is located in East US location. And what we need to do is we need to configure backup for this virtual machine. Just in case if somebody accidentally delete this machine, or if your virtual machine has got impacted by ransomware or any other attacks, you still have the data in backup you can restore from the backup solution. At the same time, if you're performing any application upgrade, or if you're performing any patching for your virtual machine, post upgrade or patching, if your virtual machine is not able to connect, or if the OS is corrupted, if your application is corrupted, you still have a backup in Azure Backup solution. You can restore from the backup. So I'll be walking you through the entire process on what is going to happen when you configure backup and what are the restore options available when something happened to your virtual machine. So as I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to configure backup for your virtual machine, you need to have recovery services vault created. So let's say this is your recovery services vault. I'm going to say it is RSV in simple. And RSV has one of the component called Azure Backup. So every virtual machine which is created from Azure Marketplace will have Windows Azure Guest Agent installed automatically. So let me talk something about this guest agent. This agent is the heart of your virtual machine. Any Azure native services or components want to interact with your virtual machine, this agent plays a major role. You need to ensure that this agent is up to date and it's running all the time. In case if this agent is not responding, you might see any components such as Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery, or if you're configuring monitoring using Log Analytics Workspace, those components may not work well because those components are depending on this agent. This agent sends a heartbeat, or no, this agent also takes care of certain operations for your native services to work well. So let's say when you want to configure backup, there are few stages that you have to go through. First, you need to configure a policy. We call it as a Azure backup policy. Since we are talking about VM, so let's say Azure VM backup policy. So what are you going to specify in Azure VM backup policy? First, what we are going to do is we are going to specify when to backup. So Azure backup provides a schedule backup option. So with the policy, you can schedule a backup. So how frequently you want to schedule, how frequently you want to, can trigger the backup, or what time you want to trigger the backup, when to trigger the backup. So that is going to be specified in the Azure VM backup policy. And remember one thing, you can only have one scheduled backup in a day for your VM backup policy. And once you schedule a backup policy, how long you want it to retain the data. So there are two types of retention here. One is short-term retention, I would say, or I would say instant restore recovery points. And the other one is for the long-term retention. Okay, so when I say instant restore, so data is locally available to your vault. So you can set the retention from 1 to 5 days. And if it is a long-term retention, so Microsoft provides the retention up to 99 years. Okay, so you are going to specify these values, and in the restore, you can also specify, weekly backup restore, monthly backup restore, yearly backup restore, how long they need to be retained. So those details you are going to specify in the Azure VM backup policy. So once the backup policy is set, the next process is going to be discovery of your virtual machine. So the virtual machine will be discovered in the configuration console if the virtual machine is not being backed up to any other RSV, and if the virtual machine and your RSV location are the same location. Then only the discovery operation will be successful, and you will be able to see your virtual machine in the discovery while configuring the virtual machine backup. So once you add these two, once you select the right virtual machine, the third step is to enable backup. So when you enable backup, what happens is, Azure backup, we call it as a backup management service, BMS. So BMS is going to talk to your Windows Azure guest agent. So it is going to provide the extension details. So during this backup process, so we are going to install our backups. BMS is going to install an extension called VM Snapshot extension. So this extension basically stored or available in one of the storage account, which is being managed by Microsoft. We as a customer do not have any access or any control on the storage account. These extensions are binaries available in the storage account. This binaries information or extension information is being given to Windows Azure Guest Agent by BMS service. So once Windows Azure Guest Agent have the information, it actually take the path from the node or a host in the backend. So this virtual machine will be running on a physical server or a host in the Azure data center. So it is going to take this path, and from this path, it's going to reach out to the storage account and download this extension. Okay, download the extension to the VM. Once the download is completed, it does the extraction of the extension. Okay. Once the extraction is completed, it will also install the extension. Okay, so these are the steps that are going to be happen when you configure backup and when you trigger the backup. So once the extension is installed, so we are talking about VM Snapshot extension. The extension is installed. Extension is responsible for taking your snapshot of your virtual machine. So when I say snapshot of your virtual machine, your virtual machine might have a couple of disks, right? It might contain a disk 1, which is operating system disk. It can contain a data disk. It can contain multiple data disks to your virtual machine, right? So VM Snapshot extension is going to take snapshot of all these disks. And once the snapshot is completed, your instant recovery point is getting created. Okay, so this recovery point is getting created, and this recovery point is available for 1 to 5 days. You can specify the time range and whichever the time how long you want to retain. And you'll be charged for this snapshot for the retention that you are giving here. It's not free of cost. And the another thing is, once the taking snapshot is completed, the data will be transferred to the vault. So that is the second step that's going to happen, where the data is going to be retained for a long time based on the retention that is specified in the VM backup policy. Okay, so you will see this while I'm doing the lab. You will see the retention for instant recovery, instant restore, and retention for long-term restore. You will be able to see them. Just remember this, the process is when you trigger the backup, there are two stages it goes through. One is taking snapshot, the other one is transferring data to the vault. So while taking a snapshot, your VM snapshot extension might be interacting with various OS components. So one of the reasons why it is going to talk to the various component is to take the consistency of your snapshot. There are three different types of consistencies. We have one as application consistency recovery point or a snapshot. We have crash consistency recovery point. The other one is file system. So any application that you're working on, be it a SQL, be it any other applications, so the application will have their own writers. So while you're writing the data into application, or while your application is writing the data, initially it will be loaded to the memory. So when you take a snapshot, if you're taking the snapshot in the disk level, whatever the activities, whatever the operation that are loaded into the memory will not be saved into the disk. And if you take the snapshot of the disk, you might lose the data. So with the application consistency recovery point, what happens is, VM snapshot extension is going to call VSS, one of the Windows operating system components, VSS. VSS is going to call application writers. In this case, if it is a SQL, your SQL writer is going to flush the data from the memory and write it to the disk. So once the data application writers return the data to the disk, then application consistency recovery point or application consistency level snapshot is getting created or triggered, so that in case if you restore, you'll have the consistency of your data. When it comes to the crash consistency, it is like your VM is shut down. No, it's crashed. So whatever the data is available in the managed disk, so those disk snapshot will be taken. And when it comes to the restore, you will not see the consistency because it just took the disk snapshot. Whatever the data is there in the disk, you will be able to see that. So when it comes to the file system, file system is basically for Unix. It also helps in creating a recovery point, and you can use those recovery point to restore as well. So these are the three different types of snapshots that are available when you trigger the backup. Based on the situation, based on the scenarios, so one application or crash or file system consistency will be generated. Okay, so let's go to the Azure portal and let's configure backup, and whatever we discuss, we'll try to visualize them. So I am in Azure portal. I have one virtual machine that I've created for testing, which is Web VM2. It is located in East West location. So let me open another browser, and I'll take you to the Recovery Services Vault. You just need to search your Recovery Services Vault. Here you see one RSV is already created, which is backup RSV. And if I go here, there are Essential Blade. There's an overview page where it talks about backup and site recovery. As I mentioned earlier, Recovery Services Vault is used for business continuity using backup and disaster recovery solutions using site recovery. All right. So now if I want to configure backup for my virtual machine, I need to go to the getting started, and I have to choose backup section here. So here, as I mentioned, there are two types. One is Azure and on-premises. And if I select Azure, there are Azure Virtual Machines, Azure File Share, SQL Server in Azure VM, SAP HANA in Azure VM. If I go for on-premises, In on-premises, you can see files and folders. You can use Mars agent to back up the files and folders. And you have Hyper-V, VMware, SQL Server workload, SharePoint workload, Exchange workload, and bare metal. You can use MABS, which is Microsoft Azure Backup Service, to back up these workloads. And you can use system state. You can use Mars agent to back up the system state. So today we are going to talk about Azure Virtual Machine. I'm choosing the virtual machine as a workload type I wanted to backup. The next step is to configure backup. In this, as I mentioned, there are two subtypes. One, you need to create a policy. The other one, you need to discover your virtual machine. So this is a default policy that gets created. And remember one thing, in Azure, first backup is the full backup. And next, ad hoc or scheduled backups are going to be incremental backups. So as per the default backup policy, daily at 1:30 a.m. UTC, the backup is going to be triggered and instant restore retention is going to be 2 days and long-term retention for daily backup is going to be 30 days. Let's create a new policy other than default policy to see or explore other options. You can provide the policy name, but by default, it's giving you the random name. So I'm going to say daily policy. Okay, there should not be any space. Then you can see frequency. You can configure backup daily or weekly. If I say daily, you can specify the time and time range or time zone. And when it comes to instant restore, it's 2 days to 5 days, 1 to 5. We can see here in the information. 2 days is fine with me. I'll just go with the 2 days. And daily retention, daily backup retention is going to be 30 days by default. You can change it to 50 days or 15 days, whatever the time, whatever the days it's convenient for your business. And in case if you wanted to take a weekly or monthly or yearly backups to a different retention, you can select this and specify this specific day in a week. And on that day, whatever the backup is going to happen, you can specify how long that backup has to be retained. Same thing with the monthly backup. On every month, first Sunday or Monday, or maybe you can say second week or third week or fourth week or whatever it is. You can specify which day backup you wanted to retain for a certain number of months. Same thing with the yearly. And as I mentioned, they can backup up to 19 years. If I specify 100 years, they will say the value should be from 1 to 99. So I'm going to say 10 years. But anyways, I'm not going to choose this option for now. I'll just remove this. I'm going to say daily backup retention has to be retained up to 15 days for now. Okay, this is about backup policy, and I'm going to say okay for it. All right, so backup policy is going to be getting created. Still validating. Okay, backup policy is created, and this is where you're going to add your virtual machines. You just need to click on add, and it is going to discover the virtual machines. Right now, I can see one virtual machine that is discovered, and I can see it here. Just click OK. Now, Microsoft recently given this option. In case if you don't want it to back up the entire VM, you want to back up only OS disk alone, you have the option available here. You can just choose this. It will only take the OS disk backup. And some of the requirements could be you want to specify a specific disk, not every data disk, right? So that feature is not exist at the moment. Only OS disk option is available. And in case if you have business requirement, you can choose that. Now I'm going to enable the third step, which is enable backup. So I just now enable backup. The backup job is getting initialized. So let's wait for a few seconds for this to complete. Once the backup job is executed, you can see them under the backup job section. It's still submitting the deployment. Okay, backup job is triggered. I can go to the recovery service vault and I can go to the backup job section. And you can see, okay, it's not showing yet. Probably we need to wait for some more time. Yes. So if you look at this, I can see backup configuration is completed. You can see the time. It's started at 12:34 and it's completed within 30 seconds. Now let me go to Azure backup items. There are two virtual machine backup items here. One which I configured earlier, so which is successful, and the one which I configured a few minutes ago. The backup initial backup is pending, which means that the first full backup is pending. So let me click on this. We'll see further options. Here you can see backup now option is highlighted, but other options like restore VM and file level recovery and the remaining options are not highlighted because there is no recovery point available. You can see oldest recovery point is null here. So if I click on backup now, so that is where it's going to be ad hoc backup or manual backup that I'm going to trigger. When I click on it, you can see the retention. By default, it will choose 30 days. You can always change the date from this calendar window. So once I stop backup, and you can see resume backup and delete data backup will be highlighted, and undelete also will be highlighted once I delete the backup data. So I was talking about crash consistent recovery point, application consistent recovery point, file system consistent recovery point, and recovery type also you will be able to see here. So let me trigger the backup now. I'm going to choose 30 days and the backup job is getting triggered. So once the backup job is triggered, you can just go back to the backup jobs and I can show you one of the reference job from here. So this one I triggered few in the morning, and you can see the backup job was started at 8:23 and it took around 1 hour to complete the jobs. If I click on view details, there are two stages that I was talking: taking snapshot and transferring data to the vault. These two steps it's going to be followed. Once taking snapshot is completed, you will see a recovery point, which is instant recovery point will be available. And once the data is transferred to the vault, you will see long-term retention recovery point will be available. I will show you that quickly for the other machine. So this one, which I triggered earlier in the morning today, you can see that the snapshot is nothing but your instant recovery point, and vault standard is nothing but your long-term retention. And you can see the application consistency recovery point is triggered. All right. And now you can see restore VM option available, file level recovery option is available, stop VM backup is available. So these are the options we have. And based on your requirement, you can just click on restore and perform the restore operations. All right. So now let's log into the Azure VM and we will look into the extension that I was talking and the logs that you need to refer in case if there are any failures happen in terms of backup. So I'm inside the virtual machine and I'm going to the file explorer and I'll also open services.msc. If you go to Windows Azure Guest Agent, so this is the agent that I was talking. This agent takes care of all these extension installation, extraction, and downloads. All this process will be taken care by Windows Azure Guest Agent. You need to ensure that this service is in a running status. So now let me go to the C volume and packages, plugins. You can see VM Snapshot extension and its binaries available here. Okay, see these are the extensions and its binaries. You can see them here. In case if the extension is getting failed, you can also go to Windows Azure folder in the C volume, go to the logs folder. Again, you'll see plugins. And if you open this, go to this, you will see the logs. So any issues with respect to extension installation, you can see from this log. And There is another one which is WA app agent log. This is the log written by your Windows Azure guest agent. So whatever the downloading of extensions and extraction and installation during these phases, in case if there are any issues, those issues will be available here. Those errors and why the extraction is failed, why the installation is failed. You can see them from here. So let me do one thing. Let me do a Control F and search for the download. Now we can see here it is trying to download the extension, VM Snapshot extension from a storage account. This is the storage account URL, and that is being managed by Microsoft, and we don't have any access or we don't have any control. This is downloading an XML file. Okay, so once the download is completed, it also does the extraction. So somewhere you will see here the extraction operation as well. You can see it is extracting this package. And once the extraction is completed, it also try to install it. It's installing the plugins or extension. You can see them from here. So that is the reason. So we need to always ensure that this agent, Windows Azure Guest Agent, is always healthy and up and running. So if you need further information in terms of troubleshooting, you can just go to Azure Backup Troubleshooting documentation. So this will give you some beautiful views. In case if there is any failure occurred, every backup will fail with an error code, and you just come to this document, do a Control F, and you will see the common errors and error codes that you see for backup failures, and some of the troubleshooting steps that you need to follow. So this will help in resolving most of the issues by yourself without going to Microsoft or any other forums. So this is for Azure VM. You can see troubleshoot section have Azure VM, Azure file level recovery, Azure backup agent extension. So Azure backup agent for on-premises workloads. So any failures with respect to backup and based on the workload type, you just need to come here and start looking at the error codes and troubleshoot the issues by yourself. So in the upcoming videos, I'm going to make a video on how to perform a restore, what are the restore options you have, and common best practices that you need to follow for Azure Recovery Service Vault. Thank you for watching.